It sounds like there is a lot going on, but of course the elephant in the room here is oil, and Venezuela's economy is hugely reliant on oil and on fossil fuels, which are fundamental to the problem. How are you going to reconcile these kind of noble objectives for in terms of climate change with actually an economy which is fundamentally reliant on fossil fuels?
Because we cannot demonize fossil fuels, neither. Because actually, most of the companies that develop my country, evaluation have to be made like what we were 10 years ago and now what we are after the President Chavez came into the power and actually changed the ways in which we related with other countries regarding our oil production. As you know, US was our main buyer of oil, and then most of US companies were the ones that were actually taking the oil from our country and taking it to their country. So it was not very much a relationship in which Venezuela was the producer and we were exporting, but was just 1% of the gains of the oil that was producing my country was the money that we were getting for the production of that oil. So it was very an unbalanced relationship. So the oil that we produced since the beginning of the exploitation until Chavez came into the power actually was oil that was going most for developed countries. So, and that's a situation for most of the oil producers until we actually nationalize our industry and we start to take control of it. Now, with the money that we are gaining in our oil, with our oil production, our country has this politic of deeply engage in social projects, not just to help our own country, but just to help others. And as that, we actually develop strong relations with the Caribbean through PetroCaribe, and actually missions to help health for women and children in the Pacific Islands and as well as the Caribbean islands and some countries, brothers and sisters from Latin America like Bolivia and all that. So we don't see oil as a way to advance in a capitalist way, but every single dollar that is produced, produce so much social well-being that the balance is completely different from other oil producers. You cannot judge what my country does in the same way that other oil producers do, because most of the gains that we got are for the help of others.
But regardless of what the oil is used for, surely a ton of CO2 into the atmosphere is a ton of CO2 into the atmosphere, and the climate doesn't care whether you've used it efficiently or not, I guess, or you've used it for social causes or whether you've used it for a capitalist economy. And if this CO2 is going up into the atmosphere, then it's contributing to the problem. Like, ultimately, is Venezuela aiming to move away from this kind of oil, its dependency on oil, and move to renewable fuels?
To your surprise, actually, the production is not what is the biggest emissions doesn't come from the production. The biggest emissions come from what that oil is converted in, and where, for example, the motors that actually use the essence that oil produce. In that regard, for example, my country's contribution, specific country contributions to the world problem is 0.48%. 0.48% of the world problem. So even if Venezuela stopped their oil production, if you have a country like US that actually consumes, because consumption is the key element here. It's not just about production. It's the way that the people live and the goods that they spend on. That's a country that actually consumes 20 million barrels of oil a day. A day. That's huge. Could you imagine the emissions that produces? So the problem is not that we are producing 1 million barrels a day, is that they are consuming 20. And China, that, quintuplies the population of US, is consuming 5 million a day. And when you see it that way, there is something that is happening in every single individual in that country, that their consumption is actually unsustainable. So maybe what you really have to attack as well is that way in which human beings relate with their environment and the things that they just have to buy. in a society like that, in which everybody need to have, a family have five cars. Why? Why did you need to change their cars every 3 years? Why they do need to buy clothes that they were never gonna wear? I mean, there is something in the individual that can change. And in that regard, my society specifically tackles that. I mean, the way and the individual responsibility of every human being. And what is happening in the US, as the President said, if every single individual in the world would consuming as much as one American and standard North American person, we would need 5 worlds to be able actually to absorb the energy that that country alone is consuming. So there is something there that is not going well.
So we need to focus on patterns of consumption rather than patterns of production. Perhaps maybe we mentioned the Copenhagen Accord and the experience of the Copenhagen Climate Conference. Of course, that was this huge climate conference at the end of last year, where we were hoping to see kind of a final, a final answer to the problem of climate change, and it ended in disarray. And you may recognise Claudia from our coverage of that conference banging on the table and refusing to sign the Copenhagen Accord in the huge plenary hall. Maybe we should get some insights as to what Copenhagen was like. You've said that there's a relatively good atmosphere here and the rebuilding of trust. Can you give us kind of a behind-the-scenes look into Copenhagen? What happened?
Maybe US could tell you more about what happened in the little scene, because I was not there. Thank God. I feel actually very proud because that night particularly, I remember that one country approached to me. And
which country?
I can't say it. I can say the story, but not the little story. Okay. A country just came and said, like, you know that this they are ready to come down with a paper and they are going to impose that. And I said, like, yeah, but they cannot force me to say yes. And they said, like, yeah, but maybe you are going to be alone saying no to that because, I mean, Obama, everybody, they agree, I mean, the big guys. And are you going to be, tomorrow's headlines will be Venezuela opposed alone to the accord. Are you going to take that risk? And I actually thought, and I said, like, after what my president said earlier before leaving the room, saying that no one can impose you anything as a sovereign country, and the treaty, what they were proposing was so bad in substantial terms, as well as in the way that was proceeded. There was just no way for my country to say yes to that. And I said, like, if I have to stand alone against it, and tomorrow's headlines are going to be that Venezuela alone stand against it, I'm going to be very proud. What happened now is I was very, me and the rest of the countries that actually got the braveness to oppose to bigger countries that were claiming that they had the right to impose us. The one that actually I admired the most was Tuvalu, who spoke the first and said that there will be no money in earth that would buy for them the fact that they will disappear. And he was not going to sign for 30, 100 or whatever money they put on the table. It was not a matter of money, it was a matter of dignity. And after that I said, like, I feel very proud to be in this side of the ones that are going to say no. And now what you have is even developed countries that approached to me and said, like, they thank me because I stopped that bad accord to happen.
Which developed countries are thanking you?
But a few.
Because perhaps to kind of give the other perspective, I actually interviewed Ed Miliband, who was the UK's environment or climate change minister at the time, and he'd been awake for about 78 hours by the time I talked to him. I think as well as many of the negotiators, I'm sure. And he was trying to hammer out an agreement, and he felt that he'd got something, the best he could achieve, which in very difficult circumstances. And I interviewed him just after. I think that you guys had been hammering on the table saying no, and he looked absolutely distraught. I've never seen somebody look so drained and devastated. Do you think there's a risk that actually taking this principled, certainly, but very kind of hardline position actually risks any, risks jeopardizing any progress in these talks. Do you think that's a danger?
I hope not. At the moment, no, because I think in that moment the world needed somebody to just speak the truth and to be brave enough to say it. Now I think they got the lesson. Everybody learned a very painful lesson, as you said. Yeah, everybody was very hurt that night. Everybody. I don't think that anyone left that room feeling that they win. Not even me. I mean, the Copenhagen Accord was not accepted, and I didn't left the room feeling that I gained anything. I left the room worried as a mother that the world didn't get the agreement that we need. So I truly said that, okay, now we know our differences, we know what we did wrong, so that's a good base to start again, to say, okay, we messed it, okay, we stand up and we continue. So I truly believe that we will. Actually, now we are respecting more each other's, in both sides. I think, at least for my country's point of view, we feel very relieved in the sense that Mexico did a great job actually getting us together and creating these informal scenarios in which countries that actually thought that they would not talk to each other again, they were, having coffees together and saying like, okay, let's take a big breath and let's tackle our generational duty, which is, okay, now we are the ones that are here and now we are the ones that have to solve this, no one else. It's our responsibility. We have to do it.
Perhaps I can just finish then by asking for an insight into kind of how these talks work as a negotiator. You're on a daily basis. You're interacting with negotiators from other countries, and obviously issues of trust are fundamental. And in the UNFCCC, in these UN negotiations, all countries have the same rights, ostensibly. But of course, in reality, some countries are much more powerful than others in the real world. Some countries are able to throw their weight around a little bit, and I'm sure that must impact how the talks proceed. What's the deal with the power and trust, and how do they play into these talks?
I think, well, besides Copenhagen was a very particular meeting and in which rules of procedure were violated in all sense possible. I think even the small countries have a strong voice here, and that's important because big countries have the huge responsibility to do something, but actually the little ones are the ones that are hurt the most. So you need to listen both and gather together both. And actually what happened in Copenhagen show that even little countries and small countries, like one big country to said in that night, like, how 5 little countries could stop us to do this? And I said, well, this is United Nations. You have to have everybody on board. So we think, yeah, everybody is listening very well each other's. I think we have to not just hear, but to listen what the others wants and the others' concerns, because we don't have an alternative. But to succeed, we don't. For us, we don't.
Perhaps that's an appropriate note to finish on. Claudia, thanks very much for joining us. Some really interesting insights, and perhaps we'll catch up with you later on in the week.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.